The Haunting of Flight 401. On a moonless night in December 1972, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 plummeted into the dark, murky waters of the Florida Everglades. The crash was sudden, violent, and catastrophic. Out of the 176 souls on board, 101 perished, including Captain Bob Loft and Second Officer Don Repo. The wreckage was scattered across the swamp, and the survivors spoke of screams, fire, and the suffocating blackness of the marsh. But the horror didn't end there. Months later, salvaged parts from the crashed L-1011 TriStar began appearing in other Eastern Airlines planes. Almost immediately, strange things started happening. Crew members and passengers began reporting encounters with ghostly figures, apparitions that seemed too real to dismiss as mere imagination. The most frequent sightings were of Captain Loft and Second Officer Repo, their faces pale, their eyes hollow, and their presence dripping with an otherworldly dread. Captain Mark Harris was flying a routine red-eye from New York to Miami when it happened. The plane was cruising at 35,000 feet, the cabin quiet, the passengers asleep. Harris was reviewing the flight plan when he felt a sudden chill. The temperature in the cockpit dropped sharply, and his breath formed a faint mist in the air. He glanced at his co-pilot, Linda, who was staring wide-eyed at the doorway. Standing there was a man in an Eastern Airlines uniform. His face was ashen, his uniform torn and stained with what looked like swamp water. His eyes were empty, yet they seemed to pierce through Harris's soul. It was Bob Loft. "You need to check the altimeter," the figure said, his voice a low, guttural whisper that seemed to echo from somewhere far away. Harris froze. "What did you say?" The ghost stepped closer, the air growing colder with each step. "The altimeter, it's wrong. You're flying too low." Before Harris could respond, the figure vanished. The cockpit warmed instantly, but the dread lingered. Harris checked the altimeter. It was malfunctioning. He corrected the altitude just in time to avoid disaster. Flight attendant Karen was preparing the beverage cart for landing when she heard a noise in the galley. She turned to see a man in a pilot's uniform rummaging through the supplies. His hands were wet, dripping with swamp water, and his face was gaunt, his skin tinged with a sickly gray hue. It was Don Repo. "Ma'am," he said, his voice raspy and broken, "this plane must not fly again. It's not safe." Karen stumbled back, her heart pounding. "Who are you? What do you mean?" Repo's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment she felt as if she were drowning. The cold, fetid water of the Everglades closing in around her. "We didn't make it," he said. "You won't either." Then he was gone, leaving behind a puddle of swamp water and the faint smell of decay. In first class, a businessman named Richard was dozing when he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was icy cold, the grip firm and unyielding. He opened his eyes to see a man standing over him, his face pale and drawn, his uniform tattered and soaked. "Sir," the ghostly figure said, "you need to get off this plane." Richard tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. The man leaned closer, his breath smelling of mildew and rot. "It's going to crash, just like we did." Richard screamed, drawing the attention of the flight attendants. When they arrived, the figure was gone, but the seat where he had been standing was damp, as if someone had poured water on it. The sightings became so frequent and so terrifying that Eastern Airlines finally removed all salvaged parts from Flight 401 from their planes. But for those who had encountered the ghosts of Bob Loft and Don Repo, the experience left a lasting scar. The apparitions weren't just figments of imagination, they were warnings from beyond the grave, reminders of the thin line between life and death. To this day, some say the spirits of Flight 401 still wander the skies, searching for peace, or or perhaps trying to prevent another tragedy. But for those who saw them, the memories are inescapable. The cold, the damp, the hollow eyes, and the overwhelming sense of dread that comes from knowing the dead are never truly gone.